park, and one of the kids I was watching ran up to me sobbing. He said that he had gotten bitten by an ant and that it hurt like this. Then he pinched me. But it didn't hurt like that. It hurt in a different way because he was bitten, not pinched. But he had to resort to a clumsy metaphor in order to make me try to understand his pain. I can't blame him for using a clumsy metaphor because pain is the hardest topic to speak about in the world. Virginia Woolf wrote in her book On Being Ill that it is strange indeed that illness has not taken its place with love, battle, and jealousy among the prized themes of literature. Novels, one would have thought, would have been devoted to influenza, epic poems to typhoid, odes to the toothache. But no. She goes on to note that among the drawbacks for illness as a matter for literature is a poverty of the language. English, which can express the thoughts of Hamlet and the tragedy of Lear, has no words for the shiver and the headache. We have nothing else but clumsy metaphors. Oh, I have a burning pain. It hurts. It's like a sharp pain. Oh, it's kind of more of a dull. I would say my pain is a 7 on a scale of 1 to 10. Those are all metaphors, and they're really bad at their job. It does not make you understand what someone's pain is at all. If I broke my finger and wanted you to understand that pain, I could break your finger, and still we would both be individually convinced that our fingers hurt more because we both perceive pain in different ways. If I broke my finger now, and then I broke my finger 5 years into the future, we would both be convinced that the pain hurts more in that moment because we are different people than when the pain started. Because our bodies and our fingers and our brains are different, we are both convinced of this ego that says my pain is important and yours is not. Pain is unshareable innately, and it ensures this unshareability through the destruction of language. In her book, The Body is Pain, Elaine Scarry argues that to have great pain is to have absolute certainty, and to hear that another person has pain is to have doubt. Hearing about pain takes you to the limits of empathy. I can only know my pain. You can only know yours. I didn't believe that ant bite from that kid was really worth throwing a tantrum over. My empathy was, and it still is, maxed out. I haven't gotten an ant bite in years. But really, how much can it hurt? Author's note, real quick. I feel like I have to make myself credible here. Although to do this feels like a betrayal of the concept. Although I tried to do this without doing it, and I couldn't. So bear with me for a minute. I experience pain, nearly daily, conscious, crushing pain. My heart, which cannot pump enough air into my lungs. The medications that keep me alive by common vomit-inducing migraines. The liver that constantly fails me. It's baffling to many that I go through this pain because I don't act like I'm in pain. I act normal. There are facets to this normality because everyone only knows me being chronically ill. There's no baseline standard of what my normal could look like without my illness. And neither do I. I've always been in pain, so much that I reach my own limits of empathy with myself. That if I'm always in pain, how do I know what being in pain feels like? Maybe this is just what being alive feels like. My doctors say I'm wrong. They tell me differently. I still don't really believe them. But although all of this is true, none of it really matters. Everyone has experienced pain, and not mental pain. I'm talking about physical, gritty, grounding, physical pain. The kind that makes you feel like your body is actively betraying you. The kind that makes you think you'll never feel well again. I'm no means an expert on pain just because I've experienced it, but I think that maybe everyone is an expert on pain because everyone has experienced it. But right now, I'm begging of you to empathize with me. That's why I put this in. It hurts like this. Frankenstein's monster is, in its own nature, an object which our brains do not immediately recognize as human. That's why we call it Frankenstein's monster. I'll get to that. This is due also to the fact that Frankenstein does not have the two key attributes that enable our brain to see another being as worthy of empathy: name and face. So there are sources of modern adaptation that attempt to force a name onto the creature. Dean Kunitz's Frankenstein, the creature is named Deucalion, after the son of Prometheus. Penny Dreadful named the creature Adam at sometimes, Protus and others. In The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter, the creature is also named Adam. This is contradictory to the work of the original text. It's a betrayal of Mary Shelley's original concept. The fact that you must talk about the monster through an indirect admission of his own evil, or equating him to an animal by calling him the creature instead, is just... Or worse, referring to him as an object owned by his enemy. It forces a barrier to compassion to be erected. I am forced into referring as a creature or a monster, or just as Frankensteins, all of which are labels that the creature actively loathes in the novel. The fact that he doesn't have a name forces my hand. I have to refer to him as a monster. There's no other words. To make it worse, the general public has forced a name onto the monster to talk about it as we would a human. And the name is Frankenstein. That's exceptionally cruel. It's the only name the creature would truly, vehemently loathe. In addition to a lack of a name, Frankenstein's ugliness, the uncanny factor, equates to him not having a face. His lack of humanity enables a cruelty we are usually capable of withholding. Would you treat Frankenstein's monster as less than human? If he had a form that you found despicable, if you found totally disgusting, if he had no name, just a moniker, honestly, you probably already might have. We constantly discard empathy for humor instead. We throw away compassion to uplift versions of ourselves. You know, at least I'm not as ugly as this guy, or I'm funny and I can punch down almost. The most prominent place that we can see this is through comment sections. Have you ever spent really more than 5 minutes in Instagram Reels and you open the comments? I mean, you ever liked something that's not even mean, just like, I ran to the comment section, or is this satire? Like, even if they aren't directly mean, it's still the implication of a cruel intention. Would anything ever said in a comment section actually fly in real life? No, because you see their face, because you hear their name. You realize they have a story, that you are now capable of empathy with them. But we have this barrier online. We see avatars and we see usernames, and that barrier erects, and so many people are just willing to ignore that barrier and be outwardly mean to people. It's active bullying. Our empathy fails us when we lack what our brains recognize as a marker of humanity. The monster said, "Hateful day when I received life, accursed creator, why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust? God, in pity, made man more beautiful than alluring, after his own image, but my form is a filthy type of yours, more horrid even from resemblance. Satan had his companions, fellow devils, to admire and encourage him, but I am solitary, I am abhorred." The monster meant, I have no face recognizable to the likes of man, and therefore I am hated.
I want you to burn this Judas of a body. I don't want to be buried. I spent enough time lying down. Burn it.
Frida.
So Frida Kahlo's story is tragic, and it's moving, and it's not really mine to tell. But we're going to get to that part. The bullet points of it: Frida was beautiful and talented and incredibly smart and on her way into med school. And then when she was 18 years old, she was in a horrific bus accident in which she had a railroad pipe impale her pelvis, travel up her spine, exit in her clavicle, her ribs, spine, elbows, and feet were all shattered. She sustained significant trauma to her internal organs, torso, legs, head, and lungs. She was bleeding all the places you couldn't. The incident ripped and burned all of the clothes off of her body. The sparks set fire to oil on her skin, naked, bleeding, and burning on the streets of Mexico City. Can you imagine the suffering? Can you imagine the pain? Not really. She was still beautiful, talented, and smart, but she was completely disabled and in constant, conscious-crushing agony. So instead of going to medical school, she revisited her childhood dream of becoming an artist during physical therapy. She used her paintbrush as a way of self-expression during an excruciating recovery. She endured years of surgeries that only made her pain worse and worse. Really, imagine, she couldn't lift her arm very much in her saga. She had so little mobility. They would spend 14 hours a day just trying to lift her hand to her face, and she would be screaming in agony the whole time. It almost, if you can feel it, if you can feel almost the hurt in your shoulder, if you can feel the neck pain that might arise, if you can feel like the way that the organs shifted and groaned with this, can you feel it? You genuinely can if you try, but if you don't, you can just listen to my voice and not listen to the words that I'm saying. And it really makes no difference for you in the long run. You are currently coming against a man-made barrier to empathy. This is not the only barrier to empathy we will encounter during the story of Frida Kahlo. I simply glazed over an injury, and yet when I really read about this, I had to take so many breaks because my breath became short, my neck started to ache, my adrenaline rose. It hurts physically to hear about it when you really try to empathize. To tell you about it, it still hurts. I can feel it in my back. I can feel it in my lungs as I start to be aware of my breathing, as I say, oh, thank God one of my lungs was not punctured by a needle in order to release the wounds and the blood and the clotting that was inside. She painted a lot about the accident, about disability and pain, and although we can gaze upon her works and have empathy elicited, and we can read about it, our empathy is not only contained by the fact that we might recognize it, but we'll never really understand what that pain meant to her. Frida Kahlo had polio in her childhood, and for it she received love and showering with affection and etc. And in her mind there was a childhood trauma that linked pain to love. I can't understand or comprehend Kahlo's suffering. I can't even speak her language. There's such a cultural difference between a Mexicana woman in the 1920s to a class full of wealthy American teenagers. The traditional Mexican imagery and mythology cannot resonate as deeply for me when I learn about these meetings off of Britannica and Wikipedia. And I am not told them throughout my childhood and into my life. I can't tell Frida Kahlo's story of love and pain and loss and Mexican independence. How can I understand Chicano nationalism? I can't even speak Spanish. How can I understand the complications and horrific nature of the sexual abuse that she endured when that only exists as a story to me? And the nature of it was something that I can't even fathom. I'm not going to get into it, just kind of for a me thing, because I'm eliciting my own barrier to empathy right now. I have to do it. It's just a part of my natural human response. This barrier to understanding, this cultural limitation to knowledge, gets worse the further we are from the tale. Would you be able to truly empathize with a mother in ancient India who loses her child when there are no photos of them, when their names are unreachable, when their culture is totally different? This takes us back to Frankenstein. This takes us back to a bias to feel more empathy towards those that we perceive as being similar to ourselves. How can I perceive Frida's pain when in her household pain was equal to love? When she sought out pain in order to elicit love and pity from the ones around her. In my household, pain is weakness. There's no getting around that fundamental cultural misunderstanding.
I'm Gabby, and I love you.
Oh, I'm gonna cry.
Oh, what have you got there?
I found this old doll.
You can take it home if you want.
So, disability is unlike any other difference that we might have from each other. You will never be another race. You may never experience another gender. You'll never be a different sexuality. But you will, eventually, be disabled. Even if, it's really, really brief, just between the time of you and death. You will, eventually, and honestly, if you live a long and happy life, probably for a long time, be disabled. And yet there's so much confusion and misunderstanding about how to handle disabled people, specifically in literature. There's a lot of traps that people fall into when writing about disability. Often a disability will result in a cure, or the message, your disability makes you cooler than abled people. This one more often is applied to non-physical disabilities. I don't feel like it's my place to really even talk about those. There's so many people who talk about those. I like to talk about physical disabilities. So we're going to talk about them within the context of, honestly, a great movie, except for these parts, Toy Story 4. I love Toy Story. So there are two characters introduced in Toy Story 4 with, quote, disabilities, within the context of them being toys. There's Duke Kaboom, who comes out of the box unable to perform his signature jump.
My life.
That's Duke Kaboom, riding the amazing Kaboom stunt cycle. Kaboom!
I was ready to finally do what I was made to do.
Kaboom!
But when Rajan realized I couldn't jump as far as the toy in the commercial,
And then he ends the movie performing an even cooler jump.
Yes, you what?
3, 2, 1, go!
What is he doing? Oh no.
This is for you, Rajan. Kaboom.
And Gabby, who was never given a voice box, then at the end of the movie gets a voice box. Then that allows her to behave as any other Gabby would. Then because of the voice box, she finds a loving kid in the end. Disabilities are a problem to be solved. They aren't a problem to be solved. It's tough because it's twofold. On one hand, yes, search for cures, fund medical research. Let's try to eliminate disability where we can. On the other hand, conceiving of a disabled person, a person's entire existence as the search for a cure, or worse, using them as inspiration porn. I use porn deliberately here. It is the objectification of one group of people to suit the benefits of another group of people. It's incredibly diminishing to their experience as a person. Susan Sontag wrote that nothing is more punitive than to give a disease a meaning. Any lesson I might have learned from my heart condition, I could have learned far less painfully with much less suffering almost anywhere else. And I wasn't given a heart condition to learn how to love. I wasn't given half a heart to realize the power of compassion. I just got unlucky. Can you grapple with that? Morally, in your brain, I just got unlucky. My entire life will be shrouded by pain. It's a uniquely cynical concept to deal with. It's really tough. It's a facet of life that we just have to accept, that some people are in pain all of the time. We just have to deal with that. And the limits for empathy, they kick right back in. Because if we can't objectify a group of people, if we can't explain away or deny suffering, we can make it justified. Oh, he got cancer because he smoked so many cigarettes. Oh, she wouldn't have gotten diabetes if she ate better. It doesn't matter if these things are true. You don't get to be guilty then get a disability. That is conceiving illness as a part of a framework for a moral narrative. That is incredibly diminishing, and conceiving of it as a moral narrative, as a device for you to make sense of the universe with, is another barrier to empathy. And honestly, it's just rude. What is more tragic? The man who loses his brother, or the man who loses all of his family, slowly, one by one, over the course of his lifetime? Although obviously it's the second, something tempts us to the idea that the man who loses everything, he knows pain, he knows how to recover, he knows who he is without these people. The man who just loses his brother, all of this is horrifically new to him. Therefore, his pain might be worse. Maybe that's a poor metaphor. Let me put it a different way. Who has it worse? A mother who loses her child to a school shooting, or a mother who loses her child to gang violence? Everything starts to intertwine here at the end. We empathize with those who look and act like us better. We learned that with Frida. We attempt to morally quantify death and suffering, limiting our compassion to those we do not find guiltless. And we empathize with those with the names and faces that look like ours. We spend so much time talking about the Holocaust, the genocide of predominantly white people, and yet there are active genocides being perpetrated today against the Rohingyas by the Myanmar government and Buddhist extremists, Iraqi Turkmen and Yazidis by the Islamic State, the genocide in Darfur by Janjaweed militias. How much have you learned about the millions of people? Do you know where Darfur is? No, but you can name all of the concentration camps, okay? Because the Darfur genocide happened in South Sudan, where people have been suffering for years, where people don't really look like us there. We can empathize with innocents whose names we recognize, Anne, Nora, Samuel, but maybe not as well with Mumtaz and Ahmet and Mushtabra. We don't see our faces in theirs. We fill our heads with reports of the terrible things that happen to people that terrible things usually do not happen to. The rich white child is much more likely to be killed in a mass shooting with an assault rifle than in one-on-one violence with a handgun. And so anti-gun lobbyists push for anti-AR legislation, even though if you get shot by a handgun, you're much more likely to die, because when someone shoots you with a handgun, they don't just shoot you once. And the majority of gun deaths in the country, and the majority of gunshots in this country, come from handguns. So why aren't we banning handguns if ARs are doing so much less damage? Well, because if you get shot by an AR, you're probably perceived as innocent by the public. You're probably perceived as the kind of person who these things don't usually happen to. Probably not involved in gang violence. Probably don't live in one of the cities that Americans that don't live there think of as places just where these things kind of happen and erect a barrier to empathy and then just move on. But we aren't at the conclusion yet. I have one more story to tell. It's a common one from Sunday school, and you've definitely heard it, from Luke 29 through 37. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. And so too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But the Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and he bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. He said, 'Look after him, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of those 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" And the expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." And Jesus replied, "Go and do likewise." I have always been taught that this story is about the Samaritan, about the man who said yes to the man without a name, the man whose face had been discovered by bruises so much that it's almost like he did not have one anymore. But it isn't about the man who, as repayment for his action, earned his homeland the name of just a general do-gooder. I didn't even know where Samaria was. It's about the priest and about the Levite who dodged him on the road. It's about their sin, not the Samaritan's virtue. Sin is the failure to bother to care. Sin is driving on lovers and artfully avoiding looking in the eyes of the homeless men while crossing Greenville. Not bothering to give them a name and a face, because these are just the people that bad things happen to. Because when New Orleans is hit by Hurricane Katrina and the government failed to respond, because New Orleans isn't blameless in its destruction, it sits in the mouth of the Gulf and it storms there all the time. And people die there. More people died in Hurricane Sandy than they did in 9/11. How many times do we talk about Hurricane Sandy, though? Because the rich were able to leave the city. They were able to find shelter. They were able to rebuild. And the poor, the people who are not like us, the people who bad things already happened to, were the ones who died. But 9/11, it was innocent people. Innocent, of course, being a euphemism for rich, for like us, for people who were just going to work. They didn't deserve it. As if the people who were victimized by Hurricane Sandy did. Now, and this isn't to diminish the tragedy of 9/11 and of the Holocaust and of the horrific events that we as a culture are fixated on, but rather to bring to light the ones we don't, and just a common pattern that we can see. Nietzsche said, if you crush a cockroach, you're a hero. If you crush a beautiful butterfly, you're a villain. Morals have aesthetic criteria, and I say that this aesthetic criteria is multitudinous. What is put on the news? What captures public attention? Who looks and thinks and acts like the people who are making the laws that discern what happens to these people? Who is a villain that we can feel rage at? Because rage is so much easier than empathy. Who is the hero who we can applaud? Who are the victims that we can say, rest in peace, and then move on? Some tragedies just don't fit this aesthetic criteria, and we ignore them as a culture. It's unjust and it's wrong, but it's natural. So we have to be monsters, right? I mean, if humanity is built on the foundation of empathy, if the first signs of civilization are, as Margaret Mead said, a healed femur that certifies a tribal group is capable of caring for the weak and useless, if our understanding of humanity is defined by compassion, then are we humans at all? The challenge and responsibility of personhood is to recognize personhood in others, to listen to others' pain and to take it seriously. Even when we have built-in barriers to empathy, even when we cannot feel that pain. The capacity to have hurdles to compassion and somehow attempt to navigate it is what humanity actually is. Humanity is a self-reckoning with the trials that life brings. It's been this way since the beginning of time, and it is a reckoning with the fact that there are people out there who will never have happiness and peace. And their story will not end joyfully, and it is still worth it to care. We are compelled to care. Caring is our natural state. It's the most beautiful thing about humanity. And I say that this caring, this empathy, is not what humanity is built upon. I think it's a different compelling. The fact that we are compelled to listen defines our humanity, even when we cannot understand, even when it doesn't actually hurt like this, even when the victim is not innocent or blameless or like us. We jump the hurdle. We apply Neosporin to the ant bite. We push for medical innovations. We stop for the traveler, beaten and bruised, and act as if we do understand, and the human-like hope that somehow, some way, that understanding will be enough. If we cannot have empathy, we can at least listen.
This is a life free from destiny. Not only what we sow, not only what we show. This is a life.
Every possibility
From destiny.
I choose you and you choose me.
Not only what we sow.